Hello again, RoyZesch.REALTOR here with Coldwell Banker Legacy in San Angelo. Today I'm doing number 6 in my series on rural property. I want to talk about deed restrictions. Okay, what are deed restrictions? First question. Deed restrictions are restrictions that are written into the deed. So now you understand that. We'll go on to the, you want to know more than that. Okay, we can handle that. Deed restrictions are basically where generally it happens when somebody's developing an area and they don't want hugely different things happening on different areas. So if they're developing an area, say, this happens a lot of time in the what I'll call semi-rural properties, the 1 acre to 10 or 15 acre lots that are on the outskirts of town or 5 miles from town, something like that. That's a real common place to see them, but you do see them other places. What happens is somebody wants to develop this. They want to make it a community where, people can come out here, build houses and have things, and not be a huge variance in what's out there. So they buy a large tract and then they'll subdivide it into smaller tracts and then sell those off with these deed restrictions. So the deed restrictions they're with the deed. So when the property is transferred from one person to another in that deed, these restrictions are written in there, covenants and different things. So what typically will happen in a situation like this, you'll have different things. You'll say there can't be any mobile homes on a property, that you can't have travel trailers there for more than a specified period of time unless it's storage. They can't be lived in. They'll have restrictions on quantity and types of animals that can be there. Interesting trivia point, Buffalo Heights neighborhood in San Angelo, one of the things in their deed restrictions that you cannot have in Buffalo Heights is a buffalo. I don't know why that is. Well, I do know why that is. Buffalo are not really a desirable animal. They're not real well behaved. But it's kind of a trivia point there anyway. Kind of a funny, I thought when I first found that out. But basically they'll say, okay, well, you can have cattle. You can have 1 cow for every 5 acres or 10 acres or whatever the restrictions are, goats, sheep, but they may say you can't have buffalo, you can't have, and horses are generally allowed. Frequently you can't have pigs, sometimes you can't have chickens, something like that. There could be other restrictions on, vehicles being left unattended. If you've got a broken down vehicle there, that they can't be there over a certain period of time unless they're in the process of getting fixed. I mean, there's all kinds of different things like that to just try to keep the standards of the area up, of the neighborhood, the development that they're putting in. So that's the reason they're there, and they're there to protect the landowner. So when you buy a piece of property and build a house on it, that you know that there's not going to be a pig farm coming in next door to you. So that's a protection you want. There's 2 different ways you can get these type of protections. One is deed restrictions we're talking about. The other is homeowners associations. There are advantages and disadvantages of both. The disadvantage to the deed restrictions is that once they're in place, they're in place. So if they say houses can't be smaller than such and such, or the fence needs to be made out of such and such materials, and then 20 years later, 30 years later, 40 years later, the standards for fence building on residential properties have changed and they're out of date. So, and there's usually a mechanism in them to change them, but they're usually pretty difficult to change. But that's the good and the bad of them, is that they're fixed. You know when you buy the property what the restrictions are. Now, homeowners association is different. And homeowners association, where they have the authority to do so, and it varies in how the bylaws are written and what they have authority, and you have to, some owner at some point has to have given that homeowners association authority. The thing with the homeowners association is that they can change the rules. They can, by vote or whatever process that they put into place in their bylaws, they can change the rules, and they can say, okay, well, yes, you could have goats on this property before, but from now on you can't have goats, or whatever, things like that. Sometimes it can be colors, it can be lots of different things, architectural committees that have to approve certain additions, plans, stuff like that. So the deed restrictions, again, are good to a point because they protect you, but then they may take away things that you want. So, for example, it's very common for them on particularly lots less than 10 or 15 acres to say there's no shooting of firearms. Well, under Texas law, on 10 acres or more, you can shoot pistols and shotguns, not rifles. So if you wanted a dove hunt, for example, on your 10-acre tract, and that's prohibited in the deed restrictions, and you've got to understand that. So there's different ways like that it can come into play. A lot of them will have prohibit you operating a business out of the property and things like that. And again, sometimes it's not a big deal. If you're a realtor, for example, you work out of your home for a good portion of the time, that's generally not going to come into play. But it could be it's a livestock oriented business, and you need to keep certain amounts of livestock there that go over the standards, but they're only there for a period of time. And again, there's as many variations on this as you can imagine. So it's just something to be aware of and to look at, to ask for if you're into one of these type of developed areas that have these type of deed restrictions. You can get them outside of those semi-urban, suburban type properties, but they're much more common in that area. So it's something you want to be aware of. You and your agent want to look at, ask the questions before you get to the closing table and get to see the deed restrictions, or worse yet, don't get them at the closing table because they're recorded with the county. You should, they're in place. You can't, they're public information. So you have the ability to get to them. So if the seller does not disclose them to you and provide them to you, then you have an issue there. You get into a place with a property that you can't use the way you intended to use it. So just something to watch out for. Again, another reason you want to call me. We'll talk about it. We'll work through the things, and just somebody to have a heads up for things that you might not think of, which is, again, a lot of what our job is. So any questions, give me a call, 325-268-0775, RoyZesch.REALTOR. Thank you.